welcome to a totally normal BWI Live. How's it going? I'm T. Frank. I have not come up with an alter ego name for myself today. I apologize. That would have been way better. A lot of stuff going on today, both off the court and on the court. So we're going to talk about a lot of things during the BWI Live show. This is going to devolve a little bit into a recruiting show. Fitz is here. Lots of recruiting questions in the BWI Mailbag, which is always on our Tuesday show, especially here in the offseason. Great questions. We're going to talk about defense ends from a couple of different angles, but vibe check for recruiting. And of course, we'll have the Fitz's recruiting update to start the show. But before we start the show, Fitz, I believe you have some questions.
You used the word devolve. And it was interesting choice of words. Vibe check, also an interesting choice of words. But if you're on the YouTube channel, if you're listening to podcasts, you have, I just go over to the YouTube channel. That's all I can say at this point. T. Frank, there's a history to this, right?
Yes. Okay. So again, for those listening, a great cue to remind everyone of our podcast audience. I am currently wearing a mullet wig and a cut off flannel shirt, which, by the way, sans buttons.
The cutoff was, I don't think, part of the deal. I think you did that on your own, by the way.
I have to admit, I already owned the cutoff flannel. That was not part of this. Is just a shirt I own for yard work. But yeah, this is all because one of our regulars here on the show, Bobby, dared me to wear a wig and rock out to the new music for Fitz's recruiting update. So I will do just, he didn't really need to, but then he donated $100 and said, make it happen. And he said he's a man of his word. I'm a man of my word. So here I am pulling the full Joe Dirt. It was originally, this is telling on myself a little bit. Back in the day, I worked on a country music station, and I went as Morgan Wallen for a Halloween costume before he started saying some pretty reprehensible stuff. Like 3 weeks later, so the costume went into the deep dark parts of the closet. But it's back here as we're gonna call this Joe Dirt, and we're gonna be okay with that. But here is the full recap from what happened last Thursday. Robert Warfel says, T. Frank, it'll be a $100 donation if you put on a wig and rock air guitar to the new music. Don't tempt me. I am willing to do just about anything for a laugh. Rob put his money where his mouth is, literally. Here's a $100 donation to the channel.
I vote that T. Frank has to wear the wig the entire show, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's what happened, and I'm currently trying to remember exactly which one is the recruiting music, so I can just do some air guitar, because he wanted air guitar. That's coming up. But that's where we are, and that's why we're here. And the chat, I think, has some questions. Corey Smith says, priceless. I love seeing Sean try to hold it together. Fitz, you do a pretty good job of being the straight man and level in all of these situations. What is your level of, like, how are you holding it together so far?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I look at you normally like this, so like I don't think this is a big departure for me. I mean, it's just you have hair now, so that's the biggest difference.
Oh, okay. So if you haven't, we're going to address more questions, because believe it or not, there are more questions in the chat about this. But we got to get to the football stuff, and that is what's happening now on Fitz's recruiting update.
Okay. Why don't you just give me a baseline in the back there while I'm going to do this recruiting update. Penn State on the board for official visits. Finally, if you watched the video with Ryan Snyder yesterday, you know Darius Dixon, cornerback from California, hopped on board. This was one of those ones where, we got background music there. Okay. This was one of those ones where Penn State felt really good about coming out of the weekend. First visit from the left coast. That's a long way to go for a first visit. Turn around and commit. Very good offer list. We have him a little bit lower on 3 than the industry rankings. Industry ranking 135, number 14 cornerback. We have him as a high 3-star prospect, number 29 cornerback. Of course, going to get questions about that. I think the long speed here is the big question. Yep. He went 11.5 in the 100 as a sophomore, so not this past year. I didn't find anything from this past year. So I think that's going to ding him in terms of like long-term projection. But you put on the tape, he plays man pretty well. I believe, T. Frank, we had a 4.31 shuttle on him, which
Yes.
kind of, it doesn't erase all the down on the speed, but that's pretty good for a guy that's 6 foot plus. One of those longer corners that Terry Smith has gone after, will continue to go after, and I feel like they're in a good spot for another long corner coming out of the weekend in Josh Johnson as well. So you look for that to continue. But yeah, there's another one, a highly regarded kid from a top program in California. It's going to be one of those ones that you ride all the way to signing day just for logistical purposes here. I mean, that's a long way to go from home, but he came this weekend. He was blown away by Penn State's approach. Really likes Terry Smith, and this has been one of those recruitments where he really paid attention to the ones that paid attention to him. He went to Washington for an official visit. He had a Tennessee official visit scheduled. Those were kind of the top three. But yeah, he moves on the football very well. If you're watching the YouTube show, had 3 picks this year, was involved, and that's an advanced program right there. I mean, Mater Dei is one of a top 10 program in the country. So for him to start and excel at that program is a good sign. It's again, I'm just going to keep saying it's a long way from home, but he's a guy that Penn State's liked for a long time. Was kind of one of those outsiders coming into the weekend as a California kid. You never know how that visit's going to take, and it took well.
Can I jump in here on something? I did some work last night. Of course, you can check out our breaking news video, get Ryan Snyder's impressions of everything. And of course, some of that film evaluation I did yesterday based off what we saw in the highlight film. I did go and I watched some full game film, worked through about a half of Don Bosco Prep and Mater Dei, and he played slot corner. So, filling in the gaps of what you mentioned of a 3-star versus a 4-star elsewhere, I think certain programs, if by the end of the season you're playing slot, and it was primarily slot where he did have some outside reps, but it was because the offense motioned him into those situations, that is just another piece to describe the prospect. And again, I think a lot of people take all of these as a negative, and I don't think it's negative as much as it is a descriptive situation about what Darius Dixon was asked to do at his high school.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I haven't watched the full game stuff, but versatility is certainly there. I'm curious. I saw him on Friday. We had a photo gallery up from the weekend from team camp. They brought in all of these, all the official visitors in early. They were with the coaches on the golf carts, all that kind of stuff. You can check that out on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I thought he was like 6'2", but he's a shade over 6 foot. So he's not quite as tall and long as I initially thought. But if you're over 6 foot, that's kind of the benchmark there. Actually, 5'11" is usually the actual benchmark. So I'm saying, when I say he's over 6 foot, I mean legitimately, if he's not wearing shoes, he's over 6 foot. That's a good start. He's got some length. I don't think he's got Joey Porter length, but he's got some length to him. And there's certainly something to work with there. And again, we just keep going back to it. Terry Smith knows what he's doing, man. He's you can't hit 1,000 on everyone, but Terry Smith has done a pretty good job of getting his guys in. I mean, they've got 6 guys that are going to play this year, 8 guys that maybe could play this year with the freshmen. That's a pretty good spot to be in. So yeah, I'm curious how this continues to go, because you've got Josh Johnson, who was in this weekend. Of course, at the top of the board, Brandon Finney and Jameer Joseph. Joseph will come in for an official visit this weekend. Terry will take them all if he wants to. Like, that's kind of how we've talked about this.
And they don't all have to be Terry's, right? Eventually, like they've added, essentially, if we talk about the long-term projection, you mentioned Josh Johnson and Darius Dixon, all of these guys that we're talking about, maybe not all of them, but a couple of these guys we have talking about position versatility, where they tackle so well, they're so aggressive that if the competition meets out that they don't play outside corner, they're still starting and very valuable roles in this defense, and getting a lot of different body types and skill sets, I think, is really smart at that cornerback position, because you can always move inward. You can't always move outward.
Yeah, and you can throw Joseph in that category as well. Like Notre Dame's recruiting him as a safety right now. So because I think they're kind of full up at corner. So it is a situation where you've got to trust what he's doing, but you've seen the body of work where you're able to do that. And on top of that, I mean, we've seen with a guy like AJ Harris that Big Ten corner is a bit different. Like, this is a situation where you can put your more fleet safety at corner, and that's something that can work.
What else came up from this past weekend?
All these comments about you. That's basically what's came up this weekend. I mentioned Josh Johnson. I think Penn State's also in a good spot with Jeff Exenor, the receiver from McDonough. This is not a surprise. This is a guy we've been talking about for a while, but I'll be honest with you. it's been closer than you would think. You've got a McDonough kid. You've got a guy that's been on campus a ton. He's got connections to Kenny Sanders, got connections to the Penn State staff, players that are here. I specifically went out of my way not to ask him about the pipeline. He was grateful for that. But I think you separate that, and I think Penn State's still number one for Jeff Exner. I think it's a decent lead. He still wants to check out Maryland. I think it's kind of come down to Maryland, Virginia Tech, and Penn State, which is actually the same three that Matthew Otten has in there as well. So that's an interesting. I think we can maybe start to see that run on receivers. Lex Cyrus went to South Carolina this weekend, probably going to turn around and make a decision very soon. Jeff Exner wants to get to July. I don't know that that's he's going to have that luxury. And I think this is not just an Exner thing. I think that's what you see from a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys want to get to July. A lot of these coaches want to get it locked down before that. But also Matthew Otten's in there. They got a couple of receivers still slated for next weekend as well. So I think we're about to maybe see that run on receivers that we've kind of been hoping for the better part of a year.
Yeah. Another thing that happened, we talk about official visits, but these things aren't all in a vacuum. Other players are getting commits. Other players are hosting players, and they're making decisions. Two that really stung Penn State, and we'll get to this in the mailbag a little more in depth, but tackle recruiting yesterday, a big blow for Penn State. Michael Carroll, in-state 5-star potential player, commits to Alabama. Zaire Addison, maybe the most athletic offensive lineman in the nation, commits to Oregon after their official visits this past weekend. So, how big of a blow is this? What is the situation with Penn State right now with their tackle recruiting?
Yeah, it's tough, man, because you thought that given how Michael Carroll's recruitment would go, he would at least take the last 2 visits. He's enjoyed the process to date. Alabama has got him on campus now 3 times in the last, I'd say, 2 months, and really blew him away. And that's it's tough to stomach. And you look at it and you say Alabama, that makes sense. But at the same time, that's a Pennsylvania kid, a Penn State legacy, a guy that you've had as a top target for a long, long time. And that's a tough one to stomach, because if you look at the Pennsylvania rankings right now, Penn State not doing that great. That great. They've got some guys to close on, but at the same time, Michael Carroll was a big time recruit. I didn't want to do like a number 1 overall type thing, but he was right in the mix for that number 1 overall recruit.
It's tough not to see him that way. I mean, he's a special offensive lineman from a complete standpoint. You know, they've gotten some really talented players lately, but I don't think any of them had the size, speed, athleticism combination, the confidence you felt about him projecting to the next level the way Carroll had.
Yeah, and I think if you look at his recruitment, Penn State is not a situation where they drug their feet. I think there was maybe a perception on his end that they should have offered earlier, but at the same time, he was a different player when they didn't offer him. Like, he was a 6'3" guard that turned into a 6'6" tackle, and you can't always see that one coming. He came to camp. He was fantastic at camp. They were, I think, we're still an early offer, and it's kind of funny because you hear that, and we've heard that with a few kids, especially in this cycle, that maybe were slighted that they weren't the first offer from Penn State or something like that. But then the school that they eventually committed to offered after. I don't know, man. Some of this stuff just doesn't make sense. I'm going to caught myself there. Some of this stuff doesn't make sense sometimes. Zaire Addison, not a complete surprise. I mean, that's a guy that Penn State was hoping to get on campus again this weekend. He's been up a couple of times, very impressed, but Oregon that's tough to recruit against Oregon. And for a guy that has been as well traveled as him, I'm not surprised to see him go across the country. He went to UCLA, went to USC, went all the way, to Penn State a couple of times. So while it's a tough one, I'm not exactly surprised by the Zaire Addison.
Yeah, that felt like there was a certain vibe about that recruitment that you're right, where there was a certain feel about what he was looking for, and Oregon seems like a fit with kind of the Nike and everything we talk about when there's the perception of Oregon as well. A couple of other offensive linemen that were not the top 3 committed. What's the situation there with those guys?
Yeah, you kind of find yourself in a pickle here at offensive tackle recruiting, and I think there might be a mailbag question about this, so I may be splashing that. But Malachi Goodman, even and if he wasn't a big enough priority already, even bigger of a priority, because you've gone and you've kind of slow played some guys on the offensive line, maybe not all tackles, but Rowan Byrne committed to Clemson. A bit surprised by that. And Nolan Davenport committed to Wisconsin. So those are a couple of guys that you had maybe on the warming plate, and all of a sudden they're off the table too. So I'm very curious to see what Phil Trautwein is going to be able to do. Of course, Goodman is the biggest priority that's still out there. But you got to shift and go elsewhere. We saw Penn State bring in Amari Hills this weekend again he was here for an official visit, and then he was here for camp. I don't think that's going to solve your tackle problem. So, problem is probably an extension here, but that's not going to solve the hole that you have at offensive tackle. So curious to see how that goes because I flat out don't have an answer for you right now.
A couple other things from this weekend that we have. Kanoa Winston visited Penn State. Andrew Olesh is a top target visiting other schools as well, and then camp. So round us out with those topics that you have here in your recruiting update.
Yeah, I think Michigan's lurking for a couple of those big time prospects that Penn State was again in early on. But Kanoa Winston was at Penn State, or Kanoa Winston was at Penn State over the weekend. I think Penn State impressed him, but I think that Michigan had a lead coming into it. I'd like to do a little bit more research before putting in a pick there, but it seems like Michigan seems to have weathered the storm, done a good job there. Andrew Olesh, kind of the same thing. Olesh has not been to Michigan as many times as he's been to Penn State, but I think he likes the appeal and the option of Michigan. So like Michigan ain't going away. Like I know there's a coaching change and things like that, and maybe that's a situation down the road where they lose a couple games and you might be able to circle back around. But Michigan is coming in strong off that national title.
And then camp, we have a question here in the chat about being at camp. Eric Eisler says, don't know how I missed you guys at Prospect Camp. Thanks for the awesome preview. We'll get to your question a little bit later. Eric, really appreciate your donation to the channel. But what did you see at Prospect Camp this past weekend?
Yeah, Prospect Camp was first off massive. Like that's one of the bigger ones that we've been to. I showed up, so I like to do some base work and then show up a little bit later because a lot of it's testing and then they get into position drills. I usually show up around position drills, but I walked into Haluba and I was like, wow, this is a lot of kids. And then I walked outside and there was twice as many kids. So I think 450 kids or something like that this weekend. So that was a big camp. Lots of offers went out. Some intriguing ones. I'm really intrigued by Peyton Falzone. Maybe a long E at the end there. But from Nazareth, he's a quarterback, but he's not a quarterback. He went out and he did the Luke Reynolds thing. He ran a 4.5. He tested extremely well, which he tested at the all 22 Elite 11 a couple weeks ago. He tested off the charts there, but he's got great size at 6'5". Kid's going to be a tight end. Like, I don't know if he wants to hear that. I don't know if he's heard that before, but he went to Virginia Tech, picked up an offer, went to Penn State, picked up an offer. When you have that kind of athleticism and you are not quite that level at tight end, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anybody that's on Penn State's roster, T. Frank?
Bunch of guys, honestly, like more than one.
Yeah. Tyler Warren is the one that I was looking for because Virginia Tech came through with the offer and everybody's labeling him as a quarterback, but he's definitely carrying that athlete tab right now. They got him to work out afterward with Andy Kotelnicki, with Danny O'Brien throwing a little bit, throwing the passes to or Danny. I caught myself there. Danny O'Brien wasn't throwing the passes. Brady Edmonds, the 2027 quarterback, was throwing him the passes. So giving him a little bit of look. The kid's going to play high school quarterback. That's what he should do. It's going to make his team better. But at the same time, when he gets to college, he's going to be a tight end.
More on that, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I wrote a couple articles of players that stood out to me. As Fitz mentioned, there was an overwhelming number of players, so the list is not comprehensive, and we actually had to break it up into two different position groups. The offensive and defensive line had a ton of talent, and then receivers, defensive backs, pass catchers, all of those guys. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Great time to remind you to subscribe to Blue White Illustrated if you're here listening to Fitz's recruiting information. That is given to you real time at the camps during official visit weekends as we get that information. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. Sign up right now. If you're here listening for 19 minutes while I'm wearing a mullet, then you are absolutely interested in Penn State football recruiting, and it's a great time for you to go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and to get that information on the regular. Because we can only be here every once in a while, only 3 times a week, as opposed to where we are there, which is 24/7. Quick programming note, we will be off tomorrow. We have some professional, I believe, what do they call that? Professional advancement days or whatever?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. So we will not be able to be here because we will be in meetings for most of tomorrow morning. So we'll be back on Thursday. But we've got a lot of stuff coming up right now. Should Penn State have a whiteout game protection in college football? James Franklin sounded off on this topic to none other than Nate Bauer at Blue White Illustrated. That was an exclusive conversation we had with James Franklin, and Nate Bauer joins us right now on the BWI Live Show to discuss his conversation with James Franklin. Nate Bauer, epic timing. Welcome to the show. Please set the table for us in the conversation that has sparked national headlines that you got right here from Blue White Illustrated.
Tifa, I'm so jarred by your head right now. I can't.
I should have given a little bit of space to allow for this reaction because I forgot you weren't here on the Thursday show.
Yeah, you got to give me a warm up, buddy.
I made a whole promo video about it.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So where were we? The whiteout game.
Yeah. And I'm going to put his quote up here on the screen for everybody.
I'll do a little behind the scenes here. I did not anticipate asking him about the whiteout. They have got right at this point in the year. It's June 11th. I interviewed him on June 6th. I want to say that's fairly late in the process for announcing a whiteout. Right. Typically that stuff is all out there. By this point in the cycle. And like I said, I hadn't anticipated asking him about it, but a couple of conversations happened right before the interview with some of the staff, some of the personnel in the Lash building. And it was like, well, maybe it's worth a shot. And so I did. I was just, do you have any opinions about this? You guys haven't announced one yet. Very clearly, they are in an environment where Fox has, become the primary broadcast partner of the Big Ten. And that primary broadcast partner has delivered massive amounts of money, infused massive amounts of money into the Big Ten. The schools are all a beneficiary of that. But on the backside of it, Fox has staked its claim to owning that noon time slot in college football. That's their brand. They call it Big Noon. That's what they want that game to be. They want to make it the premier time slot and has the revenue to back it up. They are getting eyeballs nationally on that time slot. There's just this massive conflict for people in the stadium, right? People in the stadium are not, it's just not as big of a draw. And certainly the whiteout itself is a huge part of that, right? Penn State fans love the whiteout because it's at night. It has this stunning visual effect at night. It's always against the best team that they play, or it had been. And so, this is all my soliloquy of dancing around what James actually said, which was, hey, in the past, Michigan and Ohio State said, you know what? This game is at noon. You are never changing that game, right? Yep. Ohio State, Michigan was always at noon. It will always be at noon. And the Big Ten backed it when the prevailing thought in broadcast was to have the best games at night. That was always what ABC and ESPN wanted when the contracts were with them, and the Big Ten protected it. Well, his argument is, hey, there's the quote. Yep. Penn State should be protected. Let
me read the quote for the podcast audience who can't read it here with us as you're speaking. James Franklin told Nate Bauer of Blue White Illustrated, "We should be getting protected in a game that almost every football fan in America would say the whiteout game is one of the best games, one of the biggest games of the year, and everything that goes with it. And we're not getting the same level of protection and support that other games and that other teams get." I also think this plays into, Nate, that whole Ohio State, Michigan versus the rest of the Big Ten of who's given preferential treatment. And Penn State has always felt like a second-class citizen. Fans have always said that the Big Ten is out to get them. And I don't think it's without cause where you have, again, these different levels of James Franklin speaking directly to that idea. Other teams get preferential treatment. Penn State, from just this one thing, views this as something that is equal to that game and wants the same level of treatment there.
Yeah, I think the notion is, and look, this is something that James Franklin has said previously about welcoming these four new teams into the Big Ten, is that effectively, if you're doing that, if the Big Ten as a property is making these massive decisions, that's fine, but they're dual programs, right? Of which Penn State believes it is one, should be prioritized. There should be, right? You have to have a system where there is some level of outsized influence over how decisions are made. And when things like, let's not revisit COVID, but there was influence from Northwestern and Illinois, right? And these lesser in the pecking order in terms of demand and revenues, all of those types of things. Those programs were having more of an influence than were these powerhouse programs that the Big Ten is there to protect, or in the mind of James Franklin should be protecting. And in this case, right, it's not, this isn't whining over officiating and saying, oh, Penn State is owed one by Big Ten officiating. This is, hey, this is a very comparable situation to something that happened in very recent history, where one game's time slot was protected by the Big Ten against what networks wanted, network partners, and now the same thing is not being applied. Ultimately, though, this is just red meat for the fan base, right? Like, at the end of the day, Fox doesn't care. They're not going to do anything about this. Fox is going to run Penn State and Ohio State are going to play at noon. It's probably going to be the whiteout, and there's really nothing that Penn State can do about it. So that's it is working and fighting publicly on behalf of Penn State fans, but that's about as far as this goes.
Fitz, I don't think that's nothing, though, because there is a sense of sticking up for what we want from the fan base, where, we've talked about this from recruiting angles and the ability to get players to campus and the tactical advantage of a night game with the whiteout. But it's not just about that. I think there is a certain amount of goodwill, I guess, as far as the university. Pat Kraft has been more vocal in sticking up for Penn State than just kind of being a good partner and rolling with the punches. Do you think that those are all fair things to talk about in this context?
I think they are. And you mentioned the recruiting thing. That is a big deal. Like, you want to get your kids to the biggest games, and the way to do that is give them the buffer in the morning. Some of these kids have film on Saturday morning. Some of these kids are have to travel, double-digit hours to get there. You want to give yourself as much time as possible. So, like, from a recruiting standpoint, yes. I mean, it's not shooting yourself in the foot. It's kind of the conference and the TV networks doing it for you, taking the gun and holding it to your foot for you. But it does hurt the visitor list, and it doesn't kill it. Like, you still have enough in this general radius to make it work. But as tough as it is to get to State College, I'm going to keep banging this drum. As tough as it is to State College, as tough as it is to stay in State College. Like, most of the kids coming are not going to be able to afford the hotel rooms here. They're going to stay an hour or two down the road. That is all stuff that sort of chips away at what you're selling here. Now, you get to the game, you do the pregame, you see the crowd, a lot of that is forgiven. But at the same time, a lot of that stuff sticks, and it's going to be tough to overcome if you're playing a noon kick and you can't get there. And I mean, God, traffic at noon, for a whiteout game,
right.
Just absolutely stupid. And that's not just for us, for the guys that live 10 minutes away from the stadium. Nate, you could walk to the stadium if you had to, but these kids that are coming from DC, Virginia, Philly, Pittsburgh, wherever, that is a sour taste. I mean, when you've seen sports writers get upset about traffic, right? 7-on-7 coaches, players, they matter more than sports writers in terms of their opinion, and they take it harder.
Yeah, Jacob Casastis says having any big game at noon is not smart. It's also almost impossible to get 110,000 in a stadium in a timely manner for a noon game. Traffic is also always impossible. Backing up what Nate says, what Fitz said, nobody wins. Fox does.
That's right.
Doing the Lord's work here in the chat today, Fitz. Appreciate you getting the real stuff in there. I do think Mulletgate has taken away some of the time to talk about a lot of these quotes, and that's another reason to go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, subscribe, and read Nate's articles. He's got 3 of them out there of his conversation with James Franklin that covered a lot of ground. But there is one thing that I think we have been talking a lot about on the show, and it's good to go to the source and get his opinion on it. It is the fourth safety conversation, which bleeds into the NIL conversation, which bleeds into the recruiting conversation, which is going to be part of the mailbag. But here we go. Here's what James Franklin had to say about Nate, was it King Mac? He says, I think there's a good place with a ton of really good candidates. Obviously, you prefer to have 4 guys that have played a decent amount of football, that you kind of know who they are and they're ready to take the next step. This is more kind of a wait and see for that 4th position, but some really good candidates. So he didn't want to talk about anyone leaving the program, but he did address the situation at the 4th safety. Sounds like as he says here, there's nobody they have an eye on specifically. There's a group of players that are going to be stepping into that role. What was the context around that conversation?
Yeah, it was just, look, what is the impact that vacancy creates? Right? Because if you think about how the conversation was framed in the spring, before spring football, I think if we're being honest, it wasn't about King Mac, right? Like, it was about Zakee Wheatley taking this big stride and forming a triumvirate of, capable, suitable safeties that are going to play quite a bit of football. You're going to have 3 guys on the field, with KJ Winston, obviously, and Jay Reed being the other 2. That's what it was about. And so King Mac was kind of this, I don't want to say forgotten element to the equation, but it was a very valued safety net almost. I think is maybe a fair way to frame it.
He was his own tier, basically.
Yeah.
You had those three guys, then you had King Mac, and then you had whatever comes after him.
Yep. And now that's gone, right? So that insurance policy, who was going to play a ton of football for them, creates a situation where they've got to figure that out. Right? You're gonna need that guy. King Mac was going to play a lot of football.
Yeah.
It's not as though his disappearing reps are going to be distributed among those top 3. No, they're probably going to be distributed among multiple of the group of 3 or 4 that we're talking about,
and different positions.
Correct.
Like, you're going to have to fill in with, the 11th defender doesn't have to be any one player. So do you have to lean more on your 3 linebacker packages or your slot corners? Fitz, this is what I was saying, not to just pat myself on the back, but this is what I was saying. Like, he's going to play. There's a massive role for King Mac, and it has nothing to do with football, why he's leaving the program, because this defense, and Nate talked to Tom Allen about his defense. This defense really likes safeties. Nate, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to add, talking to Tom Allen yesterday, he brought, and I'd have to go back. I don't want to misparaphrase this, but he brought the corners into the conversation as well, asking if they have a 4th safety. His response was, well, the corners might be involved, right? He was like, I'm not going to tell you right now how that's going to shake out. But yeah, you're going to open up, you're going to broaden the options that you're willing to play with in terms of figuring out what the best plan is there for that.
You guys know the age-old saying, if you have 5 4th safeties, you have no 4th safeties. So Penn State's going to throw what they have at them there. Vawu Toure might be an interesting one. T. Frank, we're in that stage where we see the guy for the first time and we're like, oh man, he's it. He's going to be the guy. Yeah. And we saw Dejon Lane this weekend.
Holy cow.
Yeah, you put a picture up. Well, I don't know if you actually know if you put the picture up. I know you have the picture, and you sent it to me of him standing beside Jameel Lyons, and you were trying to figure out, I think, what linebacker that was or what defensive end that was. And it's Dejon Lane. Now, we're in that honeymoon phase where he just got to campus. We don't know if he can play at this level yet, be a guy that can step on the field. Penn State thinks that he's one of the best safeties they've brought in. Like, whether that comes to fruition, we will see or not, but there's a lot to like about Dejon Lane. You go down, there he is. He's the guy in the middle there, the guy that does not look like a safety at all. Because, Jameel Lyons is a pretty big dude. Tyrese Mills is there. I don't know that that's going to play out. Dakari Nelson, I think he still needs another year. Same with Lamont Payne, who moved over from corner in the spring. So, yeah, I think more than likely you're going to look at that corner room and say, hey, we've got a log jam here at corner where we've got 6 guys that we think can play. And I don't think you're going to move somebody to safety, but that lion position is probably going to be more populated by corners than safeties than we originally thought.
Yeah, and that's going back and looking at the depth chart at Indiana. That was kind of the case there too, where it's the lion kind of was one player or whatever they called it at Indiana. And then it was slot corners where it's just a nickel defender. So you want to have a guy, Marcelino Ball is the perfect example of an Indiana guy that played that position of, he looked like, it was called the Husky because he was a Husky dude as a safety that looked like a linebacker.
And a name that just makes you smile with college football, man. Marcelino Ball. That's fantastic.
Any other thoughts on this? We got a bunch of stuff in the mailbag and a lot of great questions and some donations in the chat. So I want to make sure we get to that because we also have to get out of here at 11. So any other final thoughts on James Franklin and his comments? Once again, go to bluewhiteillustrated.com. Subscribe. And if you're listening here, there's a bunch of people here. Maybe you're new to the show for the first time because you saw Mulletgate. 2 months for $1. Code PSU1. We love you for supporting us here. So check us out and get the full throttle Blue White Illustrated over at the site. 2 months for $1. The code PSU. Guys, any final thoughts?
Can I just double up on your sale?
Sure.
You would think maybe in your head that the summer isn't a great time, right? That the lead up, that August is when to subscribe, but very legit. I'm not completely full of BS here. Like, we have actually great stuff right now. There's just a ton to talk about. There's a ton of pretty good behind the scenes insight and stuff that we're talking about really on both fronts, right? This is how the sausage gets made right? All of the stuff that leads to winning or not winning in September, October, November is what's happening right now. And so it's yeah, I don't know. I geek out a little bit on this time of year because it's kind of cool.
I was so disappointed when you're like, hey, by the way, I want to remind you I'm not going to be on the show today. And I'm like, but Nate, you're giving us the goods this week with talking to all of the offensive coordinators, defense coordinators, and head coach. I'm so glad you made it here. Now let's get to this, which is always my favorite part of the show, listening to your questions in the BWI Mailbag. First question has to be from RD24. Actually, it should be from Poncho570, but he says, what's the wig made out of, real or synthetic hair? Can you add some 80s rocker to the recruiting music and the air guitar? I want to make sure I'm strapped in here. Like, it looks like I'm just sitting here hanging out, but I am tethered to like 3 or 4 different things. So if I start headbanging, I'm going to pull my headphones out. So I will politely decline that part. But yes, it is made of the scratchiest synthetic shiny material, as you can see with the lights, that you could expect. Now, this question coming from, let's see if I got the right one. Yes, Poncho570, who donated to the channel and made all of this possible. He says, recruiting question for Fitz. With the commitments of Thomas and Dixon at corner, is there a very possible, possible addition of Johnson and Joseph joining the room? Any chance that Marcus Higgins can pry Finney away from Terry Smith?
And if you're wondering, T. Frank is like Animal from the Muppets. We keep him chained to his podcast desk at all times. So just in case we need a show, that's why we have the live shows so quickly after commitments like yesterday with Darius Dixon. So this is an interesting question because, if it gives you the flexibility where Finney, who, if you put on the tape, pretty good wide receiver. I don't know if he's a Penn State level wide receiver, but he's got the athleticism, he's got the size, he checks a lot of boxes that you would need to be a wide receiver at a Big Ten program. So no, there's not a chance that he's going to play. There's not a big chance that he would play here. But if he comes to you and says, "Hey, I want a shot at receiver," now all of a sudden, hey, there's some flexibility there, right? You've got Dixon, probably going to get Josh Johnson. You want Jameer Joseph. You got Xavier Thomas, who we haven't mentioned his name yet, but he's already in the class as a cornerback. So, I mean, you're looking at 4 or 5 corners, which is it's overdoing it, but at the same time, it's kind of not because of how important that position is and how versatile some of those positions could be. So if he comes to you and says, "Hey, I'd like a shot at receiver," you say, "All right, that's fine. We can make that work." So, I don't see a scenario where he ends up on the offensive side of the ball at the next level, even though he's got a lot of the tools that can make it happen. But from a Penn State perspective, I mean, all of a sudden you wanted to wear that athlete tab. Great. That makes sense. It's really funny to see the reaction. And this is not just a Penn State thing, but when kids carry the athlete, when players carry the athlete tab and they don't take away a spot in that commit list as a wide receiver or a corner, or last year Caleb Brewer as an offensive lineman, that stuff matters to players because they want to look at that commit list and say, "There's one fewer guy on there that I know about." Like, we block it out. So this is kind of funny. Remember, Marquise Wilson was on the roster, the Penn State roster, as an athlete. So we would do our preview, like our season preview stuff, and we wouldn't list him at corner. We wouldn't list him at receiver. We just blur right by him. Like we wouldn't talk about him at all because he's listed as an athlete. What do? You do a control F or a command F and you look for WR or you look for CB and he's not in there. That's kind of the same way that this stuff works with recruits. Like we give them a lot of credit sometimes, but also sometimes there's some credit that goes missing because they don't think about these things sometimes. So, so yes, I can see a situation where if you want to give them that opportunity, you now have the flexibility to do so because you have guys in that spot that can make it work.
I
do
may
I see
have
it playing out that way? Not necessarily.
I may have stoked the fire on Finney when I said early on, I was so blown away how good of an athlete was. He's a very raw wide receiver, but the tools are all there to be a high-level recruit at either position. And you're right. Those athletes, very valuable because you want to get as many guys in the class as possible. I also think that Fitz, and just a quick follow-up here, when we're talking about possibly 5 corners, they're not all built the same, which we talked about at the beginning of the show. Finney feels like a pure outside corner, and that is something you need to have. So I think the flexibility there is maybe a little bit less than at some other guy who has maybe a similar profile, but that elite athleticism is what you want at that outside corner. Do you think that's a fair part of the conversation too, if you're having that with him?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you just, I mean, you can spin this any way you want if you're a coach, because especially a guy like Terry Smith that's had the success that he has, like, hey, we need your type in the room. And maybe they already have somebody like that, but also, you can sell that to somebody. So I think that makes sense. And, Xavier Thomas is probably a slot corner. So you kind of put him in the Kenny Wosley category. So like, that's the thing. Last year, we talked about the two kids from Florida and Belgrave Shorter and John Mitchell. We really didn't talk about Kenny because we kind of lumped Kenny in with us as a slot corner. So it's kind of different. So you can make those little distinctions there. And that's another reason I was, when we talked about Peyton Falzone earlier, the quarterback from Nazareth, that's not a quarterback. Like if he commits to Penn State and you see a quarterback commit on that list, like that's going to play with your mind a little bit and that's going to lead you to asking questions. So it's better just to get that one up front.
This one, Nate, I'll come to you first because I know you just talked to Tom Allen. Towson Knit says, I'm curious about what defensive end rotation is going to look like this year. Manny seemed to rotate a little more than his predecessors. Not familiar with Tom Allen. How does he do to snap distribution? In other words, 3, 6, 8 defensive ends. Interested to see what development curve is like for some of the young players like Nittany Lions and Jalen Harvey. So, Nate, I know you didn't ask this specific question, but was there any insight you gleaned from Tom Allen that people can read about later you can give us the taste of right now?
To answer that specific question, no. But Smith Vilbert is part of the conversation. That I think is a point worth doubling back on. Right? Is look, they yes, they have quite a few names there, faces there that people anticipate being part of it. But I do think just given the numbers, there is an opportunity for them to go 5, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 6, but probably 5.
I've got written down here, Denai, Abdul, Amin Vanover, Nittany Lions, Smith Filbert. And then you kind of get into a gray area. You've heard some decent stuff on Mason Robinson lately, but I don't think you're realistically looking for him to contribute this year.
We have coming up next, the question, this is where we get into a little bit of the weeds on the recruiting part. So, Fitz, I'm going to throw this to you. Loco PSU says, most of your recent reports seem pretty positive with a couple of recruits on commit watch. Why the pessimism? I'm assuming he means from the message board. How much is a lack of NIL hurting Penn State in this cycle?
Took that one off. Sorry, I was not coming back around to this one. Most of the reports are pretty positive because there are recruits on commit watch. We just go with the South Park change theory where you get it and then you want more. Whereas if you don't get it, that's what you spend your time thinking about, not getting it. So it's been pretty pessimistic because that's the nature of the beast these days. NIL is hurting. I mean, this is 2 separate questions here. NIL is absolutely, not getting them the big time guys. Again, you look at the Pennsylvania rankings, Matt Zollers is gone. Now Michael Carroll is gone. A couple other guys off to other programs. That's a lot of that is hurting. I mean, this is not a situation that we're surprised by. Like, this is not something that we didn't warn you was coming, but Penn State staff has been so good at working around it and doing some good things. And again, I'm not trashing Happy Valley United. I think they've done a job where they've continued to improve, but there's a big gap between what other programs started versus what Penn State's been able to start. I think you're seeing that bite him right now.
Can I? Yeah,
Yes.
I just want to add one thing to that, in that I think that there's been an evolution in roster management from an NIL perspective that has happened nationally, but also at Penn State, where and really I think that this was the intention of James Franklin from the get-go, was to have a system where you are devoting the overwhelming majority of your resources to retaining and making happy the players that you currently have that are producing, right? Guys who have already demonstrated, and you're not necessarily making lofty because there were other places, and we saw it, of other programs that were really diverting a huge amount of money just to bringing in the recruiting class, right? Like that was kind of their pure angle, was, hey, you're going to spend on these true freshmen class. Whereas Penn State just wasn't doing that. And I think that if I'm, kind of looking from 50,000 feet at where Penn State is, a lot of Penn State's money is tied up in the roster that currently exists.
The guys playing the games. Yes.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And that's the right way to do it, man. Like,
that's what you would think.
Right. Now, then you're going to run into the programs that do that and also do the other thing. That's where you, that's
so there's kind of a duality to this though, right? Which is, okay, yes, you're competing against those programs, but there's also a reality that those programs are going to lose those guys, right? Until contracts are a thing, that those true freshman classes, like maybe Penn State is evolving itself in allowing, like, I don't think it's a thing that Penn State wants to do. I think Penn State is very much committed to trying to continue to have a developmental program that has guys come in and sees them build and marinate and you name it. But I do think that there's also an opportunity for Penn State to establish relationships on the front end, and then when things don't work out at the other
secondary recruiting process, that
100%.
goes to the portal of guys that, not any random mercenary in the portal, but guys that you evaluated highly that went to a school, and you're going to try and bring them in. That has been kind of the profile of who they've went after so far.
But also not making that the core of their identity. They're not going to be, that's just not who they are. That's not James. Like, say what you want, James Franklin at his core is a traditionalist for college football. He believes, he's a true believer in the process of changing a lot. And it's funny, talking to Tom Allen yesterday, that was the tenor of the conversation. Tom Allen came to Penn State because James Franklin runs a program that meets and matches what Tom Allen believes in himself. And really, if you poll college football, the overwhelming majority of these coaches all feel the same way, because that was the impact that it had on their lives pre this influx and infusion of money. So that's it.
I want to round out a couple things here in the chat. John Miller donated to the channel earlier. Wanted to give him his credit here on the show. He says, love the hair tee, Frank. He says, it worries him that the Mid-Atlantic is loaded with talent this year, and we're struggling to scratch the top 10 recruiting rankings. Fitz, we had a lot of questions that kind of answered the same way in the vibe check, which was another question about recruiting and what you mentioned with the with your answer previously about that. But I just want to make sure that John got his credit for asking a good question here in the chat. The problem was it was so good that we had like 2 or 3 variants of it. This one from Eric that I put up earlier, I do want to make sure we get to him. He says, thanks for the awesome preview. The player he brought ran a 4.6, had a good triple broad jump, and did really well in the one-on-ones. Any suggestions for how he can move the needle going forward? Fitz, any other tips, any other ideas about how to get a player to stand out in the recruiting process?
Yeah, just stay in contact with all those coaches, not just the Penn State coaches, but with all those coaches. Like, I don't know if you took the opportunity afterwards. So afterwards in camp, they go along and they introduce basically every staff member that was there, not just a Penn State staff, but if you're from, I saw St. Francis was there. Ricky was there the other day. Old Dominion was there. And then I think they had to leave and do their own camps, but all these other schools, like Penn State's not the only school that gives out scholarships at that camp. And I think that that's very important, because the difference that one scholarship can make is immense. Like, and it doesn't have to be, we talked a little bit earlier about Penn State being the first offer. It does not have to be Penn State. It can be any of those schools. And I know just from paying for college for a long, long time after I was out of college, that it makes a big difference. So, no, I think you stay in contact with all those guys. Again, one of those things, keep coming back to camp, keep popping up at camps that you think that these guys are going to be at. Like, again, not everybody's going to go to Penn State, but St. Francis was there. All these smaller schools were there. And then there's other schools that can give you some sort of grant and aid that might not necessarily be a full football scholarship, that makes it easier to go to school, that makes you find your best fit. I mean, you look at, not everybody is made for Penn State. Not everybody is made for Michigan, all these kind of type of schools. I mean, you still got to find your best fit. It's not about taking the biggest offer. And that's kind of where we find ourselves talking about different layers of this recruitment. So that's what you do. Again, continue to stand out. I talked to a subscriber this weekend that had his nephew there. His nephew was wearing bright orange shoes. I mean, that happens to be the color of his team's the color of his team's mascot color or whatever. But you look out on the field, you can find that kid. I'm not the only one that can do that. The coaches do that too. So just continue to try and stand out. A good base is those numbers, obviously a very good base for a 2026 prospect. Keep working, stay in front of the right people. And that's the thing. That's the thing that I would say. And don't get discouraged, because these prospect camps are what they are. They're prospect camps. They are to work out. So like from a very basic base of this conversation, Penn State's camps are for Penn State to work out players to see if they want scholarships to Penn State. Now there's a residual effect. You go out there and you see all these smaller schools and everything like that. But I see so many parents leaving so dejected because the Penn State staff didn't give them the time that they thought their kid deserved or something like that. But it's so much more of that, because they're filming all these stations. These coaches that come from different schools will get that film and look at it and go after there. So you never know who's watching. And that's the thing that every time I leave camp, I hear grumbling and, well, they were looking at this guy and, it's all politics and all this stuff, which is, it's crap. Like that's not how this stuff works. And you've got evaluations going into this too. It's not just about who has the best day at camp. So I think that's the thing to remember, is keep the big picture in mind if you're going to these camps, because it's certainly something that has changed a lot of lives. And here's the other thing. We talked about the portal. We talked about that bounce back. I was talking to somebody last week, on the Penn State side of things, who was talking about a kid that camped last year who went to a high-level FCS school. Well, he's still on the radar because of what he did at camp. So all of a sudden, he blows up at this FCS school. You're going to be looking at him in the portal in 2 years, and unfortunately that's what college football has become. But you found yourself in this situation where you are constantly evaluated, and now that's continuing when you get into college.
Fitz preaching here on the BWI Live Show. And here's the thing, is that this is a great opportunity to learn these things because we have prospect parents, commit parents, everybody watching this show and our recruiting show as well. So appreciate your insight into that. Before we get to our last topic of the day, going back to the chat, David Amble says, please no more hair shows. And I would just like for everyone to roundly boo David here for a second. Boo! No, just me? Okay. All right. Last question here in the chat, and we actually have some video assistance on this one. We'll get into the conversation about that elsewhere. CN Lion says, what are current players working on during the summer? And that's actually something that this morning, going through some of social media, I actually found what Abdul Carter is working on at this point, and going to share this here on the screen. Hopefully you can see it. This is his Instagram feed, where he is working out by himself in the off season, where he's doing different drills and doing different speed and agility works. So Nate, in terms of what you understand of things going on in the summer and how this particular time of year works, how does this particular time of year work?
They do a lot of football stuff, film work. I mean, look, put it this way. I have been to the building 3 times over the last 2 weeks and have seen all the major players in that time just passing by. Right. I mean, they're grabbing lunch. They've already worked out. You name it. Typically the academic course load is different and more manageable in the summer. Whether that's online classes, you name it, there's just a lot of opportunity. It's like, this is a real time. This is a grind time. Like, they take it, and deservedly so. It's a very serious time for personal improvement, yes, but also getting time with teammates and going through all of the things that they were like. It's almost like spring practice is just setting this foundation of knowledge base to send you off into the summer and rep it, right? So they've given you this groundwork, this framework from which you can put time into it, right? You can invest that time, and that opportunity comes for that time to be invested in the summer.
Fitz, I know you wanted to hit on not what's going on here on screen, but the passing game. This is a big time for the passing game to improve.
Yeah, number one, full-time job. That's absolutely a full-time job. Number two, you look at what James Franklin said in the blue-white game post-press conference, and I'm sure everyone can draw that up right now, but he says that you can accomplish more in the passing game than you can in the running game in the summer, and that's been a focus for Penn State, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. So, and it's going to sound stupid because you're going to look at it and you're going to say, well, why weren't they doing that in the first place? Well, Penn State has their morning lifts and runs and conditioning stuff with Chuck Losey and the strength staff, and those are hard. Those are very hard. I would not want to do those ever. Then you would have to break off and do your teamwork, your 7-on-7, your skeleton, all that kind of stuff. So what Penn State was running into is they were doing these workouts, and then they were trying to organize these team activities on, I guess, voluntary team activities, and they were sloppy. Like this was a situation where it was like the workouts were taking their toll on the actual refining of the football skills and the offense and things like that. And you saw receivers loafing, quarterbacks tired, all that kind of stuff. So Penn State has adjusted their schedule in a sense that, hey, we need to get stuff done in the passing game this summer. And it might come at the expense of changing a workout to later in the day, changing something around. So like I said, you're going to look at it and you say, why weren't they doing that the whole time? So now there's a workout. I'm just going to go with Monday or whatever. There's a workout Monday, but you're not going to do the passing stuff. But Tuesday was the day that you were going to get everybody together for 7-on-7. Now the workout on Tuesday is either going to be light or it's going to not be taking place, and you get yourself together for these team activities, and things have just been a lot sharper. Like, it's, again, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but it's a situation where Penn State saw an issue with the way that they were doing things. They probably did a little bit of research on it, as they usually do, and then they changed their stuff. So now with Drew, with the receivers, I'm not going to tell you the receivers are much better, but I'm going to tell you that they look sharper this summer because of the changes that they've made. Whether you argue it's whether overdue or not, doesn't matter. But because of the changes they made, they are a little bit sharper in the passing game this summer, and you're going to maybe see that pay off in the fall.
Any thoughts on what you see from Abdul here during his workout, which is on loop here on the podcast?
Nope, he just keeps doing that drill, doesn't he? No, I mean, he's got a lot to offer there as a high level defensive end. Again, we said it on the show a week or two ago, 262 pounds. The weight is not an issue for him. I know he looks small. When you put him with the linebackers, he looked absolutely huge. When you put him with the defensive ends, he now fits in. Like, that's kind of where he's at with that.
Yeah. The hand drills, what you're seeing here, that's the stuff I was talking about. That's the stuff he needs to do, and we'll see how all that translates to the field later, but he is putting in the work clearly to become the defensive end that all Penn State fans want him to be. Guys, we got to get going. Thank you so much for an awesome show today. Appreciate everyone in the chat. I will say I even appreciate David and his comments. This is a ton of fun. If you've got any other challenges you want me to do, there are limits, but if you put your money where your mouth is, I've proven that I will be releasing my CD coming up soon. You don't want to hear it, though. So that does it today for the BWI Live Show for Nate Bauer and Sean Fitz. Check all of our stuff out at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We will be back on Thursday with an absolutely stacked Penn State recruiting show. Until then, we'll talk to you later.